Lena, you have a responsible head on your shoulders. Ava is the one with true, raw creative potential. You need to focus on learning something realistic. My father's words were clipped, matching the precision with which he signed a document transferring $175,000 to my sister. That money wasn't his. It was a future my grandparents had built for me from the moment I was born, a fund that bore only my name until that very second. I didn't explode. I didn't hurl pottery across our pristine Maplewood kitchen or scream at the injustice. I silently absorbed the finality of it. I went upstairs, packed a single backpack, and walked out of that house with exactly $340 to my name, leaving the only life I had ever known behind. Fast forward 5 years. The setting is the 18th floor of a glass and steel monolith in downtown Seattle. My parents walked into my firm's reception area, and my mother's legs gave out. It wasn't the breathtaking skyline or the sleek design of the office that unnerved her. It wasn't even the sight of nearly 40 employees focusing on their terminals. It was the way I looked at her. Cold, professional. The way you look at a complete stranger who has accidentally breached a secure area. But to comprehend the gravity of that moment in Seattle, you must first understand the betrayal at that kitchen table and the one crucial piece of information my father never knew I possessed. We lived in a perfectly manicured pale blue, 2-story on Alder Ridge Drive. My father, Daniel, was a systems manager for a logistics conglomerate. A man who treated life, family, and emotion as entries on a spreadsheet. Appearances were everything to him. Every decision was calculated for maximum external approval. He controlled every cent in our household. My mother, Karen, was passive, not even holding a credit card in her own name until well into her 40s. The hierarchy was clear. Ava, my younger sister, was the center of his universe. She received new phones, dance lessons, and a newly renovated bedroom. At 14, I was relegated to a small guest room because Ava needed more space to flourish. I inherited responsibilities, dishes, laundry, silence, while Ava received opportunities. My escape was art. My high school teacher, Mrs. Albright, recognized something in my visual thinking that she said elite design schools would recruit for. She spent weeks helping me curate a portfolio, polishing concepts, and writing a stellar recommendation for a prestigious summer program. When I placed the acceptance letter and portfolio on the kitchen counter, my father eyed it for perhaps 4 seconds. Drawing is a pastime, Lena, not a career. He dismissed it without another word. The college fund was different, though. That was supposed to be sacred. My grandparents had opened 2 separate custodial accounts the year we were born. $175,000 for Ava, $175,000 for me. My father made a show of announcing this one Thanksgiving, glass in hand, like he was presenting a quarterly report. Both my daughters' futures are secure, he declared, bathing in the applause of extended family. I remember looking at a blurry photo near the thermostat, the only picture of me amidst a sea of Ava's dance trophies. At least I thought the money is equal. I was naive. The only real light in my world was my grandmother, Clara Hale. She had spent 40 years working as a masterful seamstress in Tacoma. Though her hands were stiffening with age, they remained precise. When she looked at me, I felt seen, not categorized. Clara taught me to sketch by tracing sewing patterns. Your hands and your mind are yours alone, Lena, she'd tell me. No one can take those from you. Clara passed away during my sophomore year from ovarian cancer. My father skipped the funeral for a non-essential work meeting. Clara wasn't worth missing a deadline for. Ava missed it too, citing a crucial dance showcase. Only my mother and I stood by the casket. The week before Clara died, she pulled me close in her hospital room. Her voice was weak, but her grip was intense. I hid something for you, she whispered. Just for you. A man named Arthur Vance will contact you when the time is right. In my grief and confusion, I thought she meant jewelry. I didn't know the weight of her words. After the service, I found a small sewing box she left me. Inside were worn thimbles, an ancient measuring tape, and a folded note with a name and number. Arthur Vance, attorney. I tucked it into my wallet and forgot it for 2 long years. Ava came home during the fall of my senior year. She was attending Western State University, though from what I overheard during her angry late-night calls with advisors, her grades were lackluster. At dinner, however, that was not the story being told. To our father, She was cultivating a network and building a disruptor brand. One Saturday in March, Ava, dressed professionally in a blazer she'd just bought, pitched her business plan to Daniel. She spoke vaguely of an MBA and a startup in digital strategy, using buzzwords that Daniel adored. She claimed she needed the full capital investment, all $175,000. I was at the sink, washing the breakfast dishes when I heard it. "Dad," Ava said smoothly, "I need capital. We have 2 funds sitting there. Let's be real. What is Lena going to do with hers? She sketches. It's a nice hobby, but..." She didn't even finish the sentence. It wasn't intended to be cruel. It was purely dismissive, spoken as if I weren't standing 10 feet away, water dripping from my hands. And my father, the man who had promised the family we had equal security, looked at Ava's weak business plan and nodded slowly. "You might have a point," he said. He never looked toward the sink. They waited a full week to tell me, likely to get the signatures finalized without interference. They sat me down on a bright Sunday morning, the unforgiving kind of light that exposes cracks. My father was direct. "I've reassessed the educational funds. Ava requires the capital for her venture. It's a legitimate opportunity. I'm merging the accounts under her name." It was a declaration, not a discussion. "Ava has actual potential, Lena. You should look into a trade, maybe. Learn something practical." I looked at my mother. Karen was gripping the kitchen counter, staring intently at the floor tile pattern. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom?" No response. Just the silence of her acquiescence. "Your mother agrees," Daniel said, and I felt something break cleanly inside me. I didn't scream. I just stood up, said okay, and walked to my room. That single word cost me $175,000, but the calculation I made next was worth much more. I didn't leave that hour. I needed my high school diploma. If I walked out before graduation, I would have nothing. For 2 nights, I didn't sleep. I researched rooms for rent in Seattle and structured a financial model on my laptop. I aced my finals, walked across the stage to receive my diploma alone. Parents were visiting Ava's campus, and went home to pack. I wrote a note, left it on the same table where my grandmother had taught me to draw, and took a ride share away from Alder Ridge Drive. I landed in Seattle in June. The city felt electric, indifferent, and liberating. I secured a room in a cramped apartment in the Greenwood area, sharing with 2 roommates I rarely saw. I got a job at a small coffee roastery, working for minimum wage plus tips. Within a week, I registered for graphic design classes at a local community college. I had to pay tuition up front, draining my $340 down to almost zero. It took exactly 14 days for Daniel to call. I let it go to voicemail. "You're being absurd, Lena. Come home and we'll figure out a realistic path for you." He left 3 similar, increasingly annoyed messages that month. My mother called once, her voice hushed. "Lena, honey, please come home. Your father knows what he's doing." "What is he doing, Mom? Giving away my grandparents' money to Ava?" There was a long silence, then, "He knows what's best." I ended the call. That was when I removed home from my contacts. Ava didn't bother calling. She just posted a photo to the family group chat of a high-end cocktail at a rooftop bar, captioned, "Rooftop drinks to celebrate the first transfer from my $175,000. 3 months in, I was running on caffeine and pure stubborn refusal to fail. One night, searching for a pen, my hand found Clara's sewing box. I opened it and saw the slip of paper again. Arthur Vance, attorney. I realized this was the moment Clara had intended for. I called the number the next morning. Arthur, a gentle, weathered man, had been trying to reach me. My father had been intercepting the letters for 2 years.
I met Arthur at his modest office in Bellevue. He explained that 4 years before her death, Clara had created a separate, private, revocable trust, $12,000, her entire life savings. The trust was structured to activate only when I turned 18 and made contact. "She knew you'd find it," Arthur said, sliding a check for $12,000 across the table. I held that paper and cried. It wasn't the amount. It was that someone had planned for me. Someone believed I was worth it. But Arthur wasn't finished. "As the beneficiary of your grandparents' original custodial account, I've pulled the transaction records. He showed me the direct instruction from my father to move the $175,000 into Ava's name. This is a profound breach of fiduciary duty under Washington law, Arthur said. You could sue. A custodian cannot use those funds in this manner. I stared at the document. It was cold. Final. I'm not going to sue Arthur. I don't want his money. I want mine. Arthur nodded, understanding. The statute of limitations is 6 years, Lena, if you change your mind. I took the inheritance check and stepped back out into the Seattle rain. I wasn't rich, but for the first time, I had options that belonged only to me. I want to be transparent about what followed. There was no clean cinematic montage of hard work leading automatically to success. It was messy, grueling, and filled with exhausting 18-hour days. I stretched that $12,000 like it was elastic, using it for tuition, a used computer, and professional design software. I worked multiple freelance jobs, designing logos for startup bakeries for $20 a pop. I was always tired. 2 years later, I transferred to the University of Washington to complete my degree, financed by loans and part-time work. It was during my junior year that I met an influential figure in the design world, Elias Thorne. He ran a boutique architectural branding firm. Elias was a blunt, intense man with half-moon glasses who spoke exactly what he thought. He reviewed my portfolio in silence. Your spatial theory needs refinement, Elias said, closing the folder. But your instincts are raw and original. You aren't copying trends. I like that. He offered me a part-time junior role on the spot. While I was building a career, my sister was living a different version of reality. I didn't follow Ava's life, but Aunt Melissa, the only relative who still spoke to me, provided updates. Ava's digital strategy startup was a facade. The remaining capital had been burned through on a luxury BMW lease, a high-rise downtown apartment, and relentless self-branding. Ava posted pictures with captions like building an empire, but there was no substance. My father, according to Aunt Melissa, repeated to everyone that Ava was a pioneer entrepreneur, but no one in the extended family ever asked about the invisible older sister. Toward the end of my junior year, Elias Thorne called me into his office. He sat me down and looked at me with unusual softness. I don't know what you're running from, Lena, Elias said, but whatever it is, keep that speed. You're going places. He didn't know the story, but he recognized the ambition born of necessity. I want to pause. If you are listening to this and you are the one your family overlooks, the invisible one, the one they silently decided wasn't worth the investment, I see you. This story is for the version of you that needs to know what comes next. By year 3, I was managing. I had a tiny studio apartment in Seattle, 400 square feet with an older window, but it faced east. Every morning, the sunrise hit my drawing table perfectly. My father decided it was time to retrieve me, not because he regretted his actions, but because his narrative was showing cracks. Our neighbors, the Whitmans, had started asking questions. Where's Lena? Haven't seen her in years. My father couldn't tolerate situations he couldn't control. The call came through my mother. Lena, we'd really like you home for Thanksgiving. The Whitmans are coming. It's been too long. The translation was clear. Your absence is becoming a social liability. Thank you for the invitation, Mom, but I have other plans. A pause, then Daniel's voice cut in sharply. You're making this family look ridiculous, Lena. People are wondering where you are. What are we supposed to tell them? And there it was. Not, how are you? Or we miss you. Just, how do we preserve the image? Tell them the truth, I said. You made your decision. I made mine, he hung up. That was the first time I had ever said no to him, and the sky didn't fall. But Daniel Ross was not a man who accepts defeat easily. A week later, he sent a group email to the entire extended family. I know the contents because Aunt Melissa forwarded it without comment. Subject line, family update. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive rewrite. Lena has chosen to distance herself during what we understand is a difficult personal period for her. We pray she finds her path and will always be here to support her when she is ready to accept it. Difficult personal period. The implication was clear. I was mentally unstable or on drugs. Something vague but damning. The sympathy texts from cousins started almost immediately. Aunt Melissa called, direct and concerned. Lena, Daniel says you're struggling. Is everything okay? I closed my eyes. Aunt Melissa, I love you, but ask Daniel what happened to my grandparents' money, then decide who's struggling. She went silent, the weight of the implication landing. Aunt Melissa asked him. Later, she told me his response was, "That's a private family matter. It's what people say when they are caught in a lie." Aunt Melissa stopped asking, not because she didn't care, but because challenging the system in our family required energy most people didn't have. But I saved that email, with all the timestamps and recipients. I didn't know when I'd need the proof, but I knew I would. Ava reached out 8 months later, casual and warm, as if we were just two sisters catching up. "Lena? Hey, look, Dad told me about Thanksgiving. I think you're overreacting. Families work things out." Silence. "I mean, it was just money," Ava continued. "Technically, it was my money, Ava." She shifted. "Well, Dad made the choice he thought was best. And honestly, I needed it more. You always find a way to make things work. You're resilient." It was infuriating. Resilient. A term people use to admire your survival while ignoring the wound they caused. "Fine," Ava snapped when I didn't respond. "But if you start causing drama or trying to sue Dad, I'll make sure everyone knows why you really left." The threat was clear. "Don't call me again, Ava, unless it's to apologize with a check. Until then, call Arthur Vance." And then everything collapsed. Elias Thorne's firm lost a massive commercial contract, and my part-time role, which had been covering my tuition, was immediately eliminated. I had 611s in my account, and my final semester's tuition, $4,200, was due in 30 days. If I didn't pay, I would lose the degree I had worked 4 years to earn. I sat in my used car calculating the numbers. Short. No matter how I ran it, I was short. And I heard Daniel's voice in my head. "Learning something practical. You have real potential." Was he right? Should I go back? Swallow my pride and accept a smaller, controlled life in the guest room on Alder Ridge Drive? I opened my contacts to Daniel, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then I looked at Clara's sewing box on the passenger seat. "Your hands and your mind are yours alone." I put the phone down. I didn't call Daniel. I called Elias Thorne. "I'm sorry to call this late. I needed to know if you had any projects. Anything at all, on a freelance basis. I will do anything. I asked for work, not charity." Elias was silent for a long time. "I was actually about to call you. I'm spinning off a new, separate residential design firm with a partner, Sarah Cole. It's going to be called Thorne & Cole Branding. I need a full-time lead designer, not a junior. Someone with your spatial vision. The salary will be enough for your tuition, Lena." The numbers worked. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and exhaled for the first time in years. Elias hadn't saved me. He hired me for what I had built. Thorne & Cole Branding exploded in the Pacific Northwest market. Sarah and I realized there was an untouched niche in branding corporate spaces and luxury hospitality. We rebranded the firm as Ross Creative Consulting. At 23, my last name was etched on a glass door on the 18th floor of a downtown tower. We had 38 employees, a client roster of hotel groups across the West Coast, and a corporate lab where we tested physical digital branding experiences. I owned 49% of the company. Sarah owned 51%. In January, Seattle Business Review nominated me for their 30 Under 30 accolade. When the list went live online, with my name, my firm, and a powerful quote from Sarah about my singular spatial intuition, it shattered the careful illusion Daniel had constructed. Ryan Whitman, our old neighbor's son, sent the article to his mother, who texted it to Daniel. "Congratulations, Daniel. You must be so proud of Lena." When Daniel saw the article, according to Aunt Melissa, he didn't smile. He told Karen, she got lucky. Design isn't a sustainable industry. My mother, surprisingly, didn't nod. "Daniel," she whispered, "she built that." We were not there. He set down the tablet and walked out of the room. Ava was back in her old bedroom at Alder Ridge Drive, 26 and surrounded by debt, her startup dissolved and her BMW repossessed. Daniel had been forced to refinance the house to save Ava's credit, and Karen had taken a job as a cashier to keep them afloat. They had poured everything into one daughter, and now both parents were facing financial precarity, while the invisible daughter was thriving in a downtown corny.
Corner office. Ava made the only strategic decision she had left. "We have to see her," she told Daniel. "If people find out we are estrangement and she's this successful, it makes you look different. Just go, see her, take a photo. Make it look right." They arrived at my firm on a bright Tuesday in March without an appointment. Olivia, my receptionist, paged me. Ms. Ross, there are 3 people in the lobby. They say they're family. I sat at my desk, looking at a framed photo of Clara. I could have had Olivia send them away. A part of me wanted to, but I realized that avoiding them would give them power. Facing them would reclaim it. Send them up. I met them in our glass-walled presentation conference room. Daniel was in his suit, tight and outdated. Karen held her bag like a shield. Ava looked smaller than I remembered. When they saw the view, the table, the logo, Daniel's face didn't register pride. It was shock, the look of a man who realized he had drastically miscalculated the value of his own investment. I met their eyes professionally. Hello. How can Ross Creative Consulting help you today? Daniel spoke first, predictably. Lena, you've done well. We are here. Well, because we are family. We think it's time to move past the past. Move past it? My voice was calm, which unnerved him. Daniel gestured generally. Yes, get reconnect. You're doing fine. I'm doing fine, I repeated slowly. Because 5 years ago, I started over. You took $175,000 that had my name on it and moved it to Ava. That is a breach of fiduciary duty under Washington law. The air left the room. Daniel's jaw clenched. I made a decision for this family's future, he snapped. I put the money where I believed it had the best opportunity for return. And look at you. It clearly worked out. Like he was responsible for my resilience. I didn't sue you, I continued, unfazed. Because Arthur Vance showed me the records. You don't have it anymore. You refinanced the house to save Ava, and she burned through it anyway. My mother gasped, looking at Daniel. Is that true? Silence. Ava looked at her shoes. Lena, Ava said, switching to a practiced pleading tone. I'm in a tough spot. If you could just help me with about $40,000 of the credit cards. No. The word was clean. I slid a business card across the table. Ross Creative Consulting handles corporate and hospitality branding, not personal debt resolution. If you're looking for family forgiveness, that process requires an actual apology and financial accountability for what was taken. Until then, you are strangers who entered the wrong life. I stood up. Olivia will show you the elevators. I won. Not because I have the office or the award, but because I am the person who built a life they can no longer reach or control. The weeks following my family's unannounced visit were not filled with the chaos I had braced for. Rather, they brought a strange, heavy quiet. My father retreated further into the house on Alderridge Drive, and the shutters, which he had once repainted every spring to maintain an image of perfection, continued to peel and fade. Aunt Melissa confirmed that my mother had finally filed for divorce and was living in a modest one-bedroom apartment across town. For the first time in her life, Karen Ross was learning the mechanics of a bank account that belonged solely to her. Meanwhile, my firm was thriving. Sarah and I finalized a deal for a new satellite office in Portland, and I found myself managing teams, reviewing structural blueprints, and negotiating with hotel chains that held budgets larger than my father's entire lifetime income. Every time I signed a contract, I thought of the real potential he had once dismissed. It wasn't about the money. The money had become merely a metric of the stability I had forged. It was about the lack of doubt. The haunting question of, what if he's right, had finally vanished, replaced by the cold, hard reality of my portfolio. I often spent late nights in my office, looking down at the Seattle skyline. I realized that the greatest gift my father had ever given me was his dismissal. By stripping me of his support and his expectations, he had inadvertently forced me to develop my own. I wasn't defined by the spreadsheets he worshipped or the image he obsessed over. I was defined by the glass walls I stood behind, the employees I supported, and the fact that I was the author of every single sentence in my professional life. I hadn't just survived his system. I had built an entirely different one that was immune to his specific brand of control. One evening, I found myself sitting at my drafting table with my mother's letter before me. I had read it dozens of times, tracing the ink, feeling the weight of her admission. She had apologized not just for the money, but for the cowardice, for standing at the sink and watching my future disappear because she was too afraid to challenge the man who held the purse strings. She was finally taking her own path, studying accounting, and finding her voice at 53. I realized then that while I had needed to leave to survive, She had needed to stay until she finally broke. I picked up a pen to write a reply, but stopped. I wasn't ready to bridge that gap. The wound was still too fresh, and the history too complex. But I didn't toss the letter into the shredder, as I had done with my father's voicemails. I placed it in the wooden box my grandmother had given me, the box that held my measuring tape, my needles, and the memory of the only person who had ever truly seen me. It felt like a monument to survival. The next morning, I received a call from Arthur Vance. "The 6-year window on your custodial account is closing, Lena," he said cautiously. "Your father's assets are currently tied up in the home and legal fees for the divorce. Even if you sued now, you'd be collecting pennies. But if you want to file just to ensure a public record of what happened, to prevent him from ever rewriting this history again, the option remains." I thanked him and told him to hold the file. I didn't need the money, and I didn't need a public courtroom drama to validate my success. My success was the validation. I hung up the phone and walked out into the open office floor, greeted by the low, productive hum of my own creation. I had moved past the point of needing the past to prove anything to anyone. The story of the girl who draws became something of a quiet legend in my firm. When interns asked me how I developed the discipline to handle high-pressure branding projects, I didn't tell them about my father or the $175,000. I told them about the importance of ownership. You have to define your own potential, I'd say, because there will always be someone who tries to categorize you, someone who thinks they know what you're capable of better than you do. My firm, Ross Creative Consulting, eventually merged with a larger design collective, making me a principal partner at 25. I bought a home, not a large, showy house on a ridge, but a clean, minimalist space with a library and a studio. Every morning, I woke up and verified that the only person making decisions about my life was me. I still keep the wooden sewing box on my desk, a permanent reminder of the seamstress who taught me that the things you build with your hands and your mind are the only things that truly belong to you. My father's house eventually went up for sale, a forced liquidation to cover his debts and the legal fees of a divorce he never saw coming. I heard he moved into a rental, a small, dark place far from the neighborhood where he had once painted his mailbox every spring to keep up appearances. He never contacted me again. He didn't have to. The silence wasn't a punishment. It was simply the result of a system that had finally run its course. I hadn't defeated him. I had simply outlived the necessity of his opinion. And in the final accounting, that was the most practical lesson I could have ever learned.